So in today's video, I'm sharing when to give advice and when to practice detachment so that you are showing the right kind of support to your loved ones. But if you're new, my name is Michelle Ferris. I'm a psychotherapist and I love helping people create relationships that work. So why do we love giving advice? I know for me, it makes me feel good. It makes me feel like I'm contributing. The problem is that if you overuse it or do it when it's not necessary, it can really harm your relationships, and I don't want that for you. So in this video, we're going to share when you can give advice and when it's better to practice detachment. So the first thing I want you to look at is your motives. Why do you want to give advice? This is a trick question sometimes because often the answer is, well, I just want to be helpful. But I want you to dig a little deeper than that. What does giving advice to others give you? For instance, does it make you feel seen, like you're the expert? Because maybe in your life you don't feel that way very often. And again, we're not bad or wrong for the reasons we're doing it, but they are important to assess because that may tell you where you may need to do some work. For instance, if you're giving advice because it makes you feel good about yourself, you might have to find other sources to boost your self-esteem rather than telling someone else what you think they should do. If you're codependent like me, you have a big heart and you want to help, and that's why you're wanting to give advice. But here are some times when you can give advice and it's okay. Number one, when somebody asks you for it. Now, the truth is when you actually look at your life, ask yourself, how many times do people actually ask you for advice? Even as a counselor, a lot of people don't ask me for advice because they just want to be heard. They want to talk things out. And so finding the right form of support is going to be key here, because when somebody directly asks you for advice, you have the green light. But here's the thing, share it as a point of view. Don't share it as an authority or this is what you should do. That's a real temptation. But when we should somebody, the other person may get defensive, because when you're told what you should be doing, how do you react? I know for me, I get a little bit tense because I don't like to be told what to do. I like to be heard and I like to problem solve, not just be told what they think is best for me. The next time that it's really okay to give advice is when somebody is frozen in fear and they clearly need to take action to stay safe or to get help, but they can't do it. So for instance, years ago, my niece had a dislocated elbow. She was about 4 years old. It was Christmas Day and I froze. And luckily I wasn't the only adult there. Her parents got her to the hospital. But for me, if I was alone with her, I would have needed somebody to say, Michelle, we gotta go. We gotta get my niece some help. So that is one of those situations where you may need to be a little bit more directive in telling the other person what they need to do in order to stay safe. Another example of when it's okay to give advice is when you've had a very similar experience. This often is the best time to share advice, but even then, you want to ask first. You want to say, hey, you know what? Would you like some feedback on that? Because I've had a very similar situation. Often in that scenario, somebody is going to say yes because when we're hurting, we want to be understood. And if somebody is talking from their own experience and not telling us what to do, that can be super helpful and a way to give love and support to your loved one. Now again, what you want to do is you want to couch it in, this was your experience, not this was my experience and you should do the exact same thing. Because when giving advice, we want to give that other person room to make their own decisions and to figure it out for themselves, which is where detachment comes in. So there are going to be times when it's not good to give advice. It's actually better to practice detachment. What is detachment? It's basically letting someone lovingly figure it out themselves. This might be a situation where it's best to keep quiet and to listen and to validate what they're saying, but not directly give advice. If you've ever tried giving advice and it hasn't worked, say me too in the comments. This video is going to help. Detachment can be a way to show support without getting directly involved in the situation, which can be really helpful because a lot of times people don't want advice, but they want support. And giving someone the dignity to figure it out themselves and to help them brainstorm or listen or validate their emotions and what they're going through can be a really helpful way to show that you care. Detachment is also letting somebody have their own consequences. So say somebody is talking to you and they're doing some really bad behavior that you don't support. Telling them what to do isn't necessarily going to change things. But letting them figure it out and staying quiet and say, yeah, that sounds really tough, can be another alternative. Because if somebody is practicing toxic behavior and you know in your heart that you've tried giving them the solution before and it's always fallen flat because they haven't taken you up on it, that's a really good sign that detachment is probably the better choice rather than giving them advice. Because I don't know about you, but I've given advice to friends where I've said it more than once and I know in my gut I need to stop because they don't want that. And that was my lesson, to realize that if I'm giving advice more than once, it's most likely for my benefit because it makes me feel good, not actually helping the other person. And that's where looking at our own behavior and our own motives here can be really helpful. Because if we're giving advice to feel like the expert and the one with all the answers, that may not be what the other person needs. I know for me, I've had that happen where somebody's giving me advice and I feel totally dismissed and invisible because I can tell they have their own motives, and the motives aren't about helping me. They're about making themselves look good. So when is it better to practice detachment rather than giving advice? One scenario is when two people you love are in conflict. Say you have two family members that are warring right now. That's probably a really good time to not give advice and get yourself in the middle, because most of the time that doesn't end well. One or both people may end up being seriously unhappy with you because they may feel like you're interfering. That's when detaching and just giving neutral support and validation can really help you a lot. Another scenario might be maybe you're friends with a couple and they're going through a divorce and you want to get in there and tell them what to do because you have some great ideas. Now, your heart may be in the right place because you want to help, but giving advice can get messy really fast because it can backfire on you. For instance, you should leave him, he's toxic. What if she decides to get back together with him? She might come back and say, I don't feel supported by you because you wanted me to leave this relationship. So those are some scenarios where it's really better to practice detachment. So another example when practicing detachment is much better than giving advice is when you notice that you're getting triggered by what the other person is saying, which means that you feel almost compelled to tell them what to do because it hit on a pain point in your past that is unresolved and still really painful for you. And you'll know when you're triggered because you feel absolutely compelled to do something for that other person that they're not necessarily asking for. You might want to tell them exactly what you think they should do, or guide them in the process, or give them resources because you don't want them to suffer the same pain you did. And while you have good intentions and you probably have a huge heart, unless they're asking for those resources, I would rather you practice some detaching, because what we have to remember is that people are adults and they will ask you for what they need. And if you're not sure, you can absolutely say, hey, how can I support you in this situation? Because I'm not really sure what you're needing. That can be a really loving way to show support to your loved one. Another example when detachment is much better than giving advice is when it's a problem that's best handled by the professionals. Say your friend is having marital issues and they're considering getting a divorce and they ask you what they think you should do. That's the time when I would definitely say, you know what, maybe you want to get some counseling here, because there are certain problems that are best handled by the professionals. And even though you may want to help them and you may even think you have the answers for them, it can be emotionally dangerous to insert your own opinion on things that are much better handled by a counselor. For instance, if there's issues of abuse, or maybe your friend has a teenager that's getting out of control, maybe there's active addiction, recommend someone who is better qualified to help walk them through the process. Because let's face it, there's a lot of mental health issues like anxiety, depression, relationship issues that you may think you can be helpful for, But direct advice giving is probably not the best solution at that point. That's when detaching with love can really make a difference. So the next step I want you to do is go watch my video on how to detach when you love somebody, because that is your next step. Thanks so much.